All right. Um, Thank you all for joining here. As you can see, I am not Daniel Shenkin, but I'm stepping in for him along with Josh. And we're going to be here to co-host our extraordinary and interesting talk with Martin Bridge. So had the honor of discovering the fantastic work that Martin does as a visionary artist. And he is here to share with us how we can integrate art in multiple ways. So I'd love to hand it off to Martin to dive a little bit more into what you plan on talking to us about this evening. So thank you.
Uh, cool. Thank you, Quest. I'm wondering, since this is a community conversation, the educator in me likes to know who I'm talking to sometime. And if it's not too irregular, I would love to maybe have just like a quick whip around of those who are present and kind of hear sort of like what's drawing you to this talk. What's your role? I know most of the people here are part of the TAM integration community, so if you're sitters or what your sort of draw and work in the entheogenic realm is, I'd love to just sort of see that so that it helps me sort of frame who I'm talking to and probably change how I communicate with you. If you're willing to do that. Does that sound good? Awesome. It can be super quick. Um, uh, I'm going to ask for a quick thumbs up from everyone who would like to introduce themselves, and I'm going to just take note of who that is.
Looks
All
like
right,
we got everybody.
sweet. All right, so Tonya, since you were the first face I saw, I'd love to start with you.
Hi, I'm Tanya, and Martin, I actually indirectly met you because I took your brother's alchemical mask making workshop at COSM, and I saw your incredible painting of Maria Sabina. And then as a result of that, I went and found you and your art, so I'm just thrilled to be here. My experience has been with Santo Daime, and that work really has led me to more of a psychopomp kind of work. So what I'm really interested in and curious about would be psychedelics and then how you then bring it into the art world. So this topic sounds really, really relevant. So thank you for having it. And I'm not familiar with TAM integration, so I have no idea.
Cool.
So so yeah, so it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for offering it. And I'm in Pennsylvania.
Excellent. Lance, you're the next one I see.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Lance, he, him pronouns. I'm located in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm a current grad student studying counseling and music therapy at Lesley University. And my thesis that I'm working on is exploring integration and music and the arts. So when I came across this presentation, I was really fascinated to learn more and hear what you have to offer. And I did, Martin, look into your work beforehand, and it is really beautiful. So I'm interested to hear more about that.
Thank
It's
you.
good to be here, everyone.
Al and friend.
Hey, I am not involved in TAM integration either, but I just finished like a psychedelic guide training, and have been working with art integration and for myself and with others, and just love to hear more about it.
Awesome.
This is Alex.
Oh, sorry. What was the name? Al.
Alex. I'm Alex. I'm her husband. She thought I might find this interesting. I'm an architect and a musician. So
Great.
integrating this stuff, I've done a lot of journey work over the last 4 years, and journey work and working with grief. So yeah, so I'm just here as someone who's interested. So thank you.
Thank you. Jordan.
Jordan, you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jordan. I'm in Daniel's current year-long psychedelic integration coaching class. Um, I've been using psychedelics for a long time personally, and I am definitely very passionate about them. So I finally decided to start moving towards making that my career rather than the career I kind of just fallen into. So I'm not sure exactly what that looks like moving forward. I don't know if I actually want to be an integration coach or more of an educator or what exactly I want to create in the space yet. So, and I've been in kind of a creative block for, a while in my life, not really having a ton of motivation to create, even though I know that I'm an incredibly creative individual and have a ton of potential for that. So I guess I'm curious to see, always curious to get inspiration and see other people's creations helps me. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to present for us, Martin.
Thank you. Josh.
Hey, my name is Josh Jupiter. I live in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a psychedelic integration coach and trip sitter. And yeah, I've been with the TAM integration crew for about 3 years now. And happy to be here. I just finished working with a client and happy to be here in the space. Glad I could make it.
Glad to have you. Tony.
Hi, I'm Tony. I joined the Mountain community 2 or 3 months ago now, after a year of kind of coming back to psychedelics in middle age and maybe a different way than I had when I was younger, more intentionally and ceremonially. And one of the many effects is just kind of a reinvigoration of my creative urge, both around music and visual art, but also with maybe a new appreciation for, psychedelic art. And I'm kind of exploring that a little bit more, and was keen to hear what you'd be talking about today.
Thank you, Tony. And Musino?
Hi, it's pronounced Muserio. It's actually French for mushroom. My name is Ava. No, you're fine. New to your work, Martin. I'm excited to see what you have. I just had this on my calendar because I wanted to check out TAM integration and kind of see what it's all about. My background is a graphic designer, so I work in the art world as advertising. And I just finished my program with SoundMind Institute for psychedelic facilitation here in Portland, Oregon. I've been working actively in the unregulated space for quite a while, and I'm always interested to see new approaches to integration. I think integration is the most important piece of this entire thing, is meaning making. And so I think art is an easy gateway into meaning making. So I'm excited to see what you have. I've never even seen a piece of yours, so this is going to be fun. Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Well, how about I'm going to go ahead and start driving the screen over here so you can start to look at some of my work as I yammer away. Okay. My name is Martin Bridge. I have just kind of made a major shift in my professional career. I've been in education for 28 years, 23, the last 23 in the public school system. So my sort of role in the psychedelic world has been very in the shadows, and I've been a sort of lateral advocate in finding ways of helping to contribute to it without necessarily being direct about it. And in the last couple of years, as I was realizing that the place that needed me a little more than I needed them, I started to free myself up a little bit. And just to share a little bit of my story, after a relatively sort of, grew up in a very conservative environment, but was definitely a misfit within it. And when I was 25 years old, had my first psychedelic experience where a group of us were off in the forest, and a couple of us had brought some fungi enough to share. And then suddenly another person was like, "Oh, you brought some? I brought some. You brought some? You brought." And suddenly it was like a stone soup moment where 4 different people were throwing what they had in a big pile instead of like taking what we intended first. It was turned into a heroic dose, and I wouldn't really say a life-changing experience for me, as someone who was already on a path, a sort of spiritual path as an animist, very interested in the environment and sustainability, and totally, immersed in art from day one, as my father was an art teacher. But it definitely catalyzed and amped up some of my work in those things. And it was one of the experiences where many people have, where when you have that truly awesome, awe-inspiring experience, I left there going like, that was amazing. I am not ready for that anytime soon. It took me years to even want to go back and explore and realize that you didn't have to consume a fistful of mushrooms with, and then you could just do it in a little more relaxed setting. But I wouldn't trade that entry point for any other way. My visual artwork, while I've worked in a ton of different media, from drawing, painting, digital art, sculpture, I'm also a scenic designer, so I've done a lot of work in the theater and muralist. My fine art work over the last 15 years has really been focused mostly on painting, because it's easier to find new homes for that than just about anything else. And my work fits most closely into the visionary art category, in terms of the general style. So let's I want to provide a little definition for visionary art. Can be sort of used in different meanings. For a huge segment of the art world, visionary artists are ones who teach themselves, like self-taught artists. But there are a ton of people in the visionary art movement who are very much not self-taught, and it has become synonymous for essentially psychedelic, often very psychedelic influenced art with often a spiritual dimension to it, which kind of reflects a slightly different attitude to it than some that might just want to look at psychedelics as something so that people can freak out and go wild and just party like mad. So there is here, I have a picture if you're not familiar. This is Theologue, one of the most popular paintings by the artist Alex Gray, who is widely considered the sort of at the forefront of the movement especially in the US. This is a massive piece. If you're in the Northeast and you have a chance to swing by the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors in Wappingers Falls, New York, it is an amazing space with a 12,000-foot gallery just stuffed with him and his wife's work. Also with Tanya mentioned, having been there in the summer, they have a beautiful space in the basement, the Psychedelic Reliquary, that has some amazing keepsakes, like Albert Hoffman's glasses next to the painting that Alex did of him, that he signed, that Albert signed on his 103rd birthday. It's an amazing site, and I feel blessed to have been involved in that for the last 20 years and through its development. So anyway, that's just a definition of when I say visionary art, what that sort of canon sort of has come to mean, especially for me. So I want to highlight just like this is by no means a complete list, but like art can serve a huge amount of fit a lot of different niches within the current psychedelic renaissance, right? And a really important one is, especially considering that this is something that is still very much a fringe part of our larger culture. One of the things is many of us are thirsty for community, right? And looking for allies, the people to work with, to support us. Art and different arts, whether we're talking visual art or music, festivals, things like that, give us a place to connect to like-minded people, or as I say, like calling the tribe together. And there's certain those of us who will be out in the world letting our freak flags fly. Often there's a resonance with psychedelic experience that many people in the visionary art world have in terms of visual connection to journeys. And when people see that, it often lets people feel more open to share their experience and to look for connection. So really, like, that's a very simple level of where one role that the visual arts can play. Sorry, Zoom's bouncing around. Now, another thing I kind of mentioned, how a lot of visionary artwork will kind of have a resonance for people. Well, often people see things in either geometric based art that reminds them of an experience they might have had while under a particular entheogen. And the artist whose work is at the top center is a phenomenal digital artist who lives out in Denver now, Android Jones, and he had a really beautiful way of putting it, where he said, art was it was the most powerful tool for bringing evidence back from the places we can't take cameras, right? And often at times, artworks like these can help us return to those experiences. And just like integration work, right, is not just having the experience of the journey, but going back there so that we can hold on to the most important and most significant aspects of those journeys, right? And one of the things that we'll often find is that many people, while under the effect of some entheogen, will have this experience of having it all figured out. Like in that moment, they're like, I know it, right? And it's so ephemeral that often we can lose that. And days, weeks, months down the line, even years down the line, we can like forget where we were in that experience. And sometimes visual arts can give us just a little entry point, or to kind of go back in our memory. That's another function that I think is really pretty important, and one of the reasons why I think a lot of people who have these experiences will often be drawn to work that reminds them of a particular part of their experience and want to bring it into their lives on a regular basis so they can return to that space. This is a piece of mine that I did a couple of years ago that was kind of somewhat where I was having a discussion with someone, and we're talking about the term that I sometimes I feel like gets a little overused, the ego death moment, where it becomes like this quest that many people want to have when they're going into a psychedelic experience, and it's like some sort of a goalpost to make it to, but like how that means different things to different people, and for me, there's in the times where I've had something that I would equate to what most people describe when using that term, is when aspects of self, the sort of ideas I have about how it all works, start to crumble apart and expose some sort of grander vision in that experience. Now, I'm not a poet. I don't know how to describe that so much in words. And so this is my medium, and how I try to share a piece of that. This is another piece titled Melange, and this was actually a commission from a clinic where one of the clinicians there, who worked a lot with ketamine, he really loved my work, and he wanted to create a piece. He wanted me to create a piece for him that was honoring the spirit that he likes to address as melange. That was his term for the entity, because he felt like ketamine had a harsh sound to it, and it didn't work for him. And to be honest, I had never used this substance until he did a group session, for a little therapeutic session for myself and two others. And to be honest, as someone who was the sober guy at all the raves in the 90s, driving a carload of people home who were with quaking jaws and whatnot, like my only experience of that medicine was people getting really messed up on it. So I was a little fearful of the experience, and I was hesitant to do it. But he was persuasive. And so I got to go through a journey that actually went through, this group was also working with MAPS in the MDMA trials, sort of through MDMA and then leading into a session with ketamine. And it actually wound up being an incredibly transformational experience for myself, where I was able to kind of shed some patterns and some bad coping mechanisms that I had built up. And the most difficult thing for me in it, having had such a sense of movement, this mix of stillness and calm, but like constant movement through the journey. I was like, how the hell do I capture that in an image? And this was the best I could do. And for not having it be animated. And I've had some nice responses from people in the clinic saying it felt right to them, people who are familiar with its signature. So, all right, moving on. Another place that, and this is an area that I really would love to see a lot more work and intention going into, especially mentioned, oh, hold on, who was it? Is it Tony? Are you the architect? Am I remembering correctly? No, who's the architect in the room? I'm as someone who also designs spaces.
Alex, I'm
Alex, okay,
architect
cool.
of about 30 years and working in architecture. Thanks.
Sorry. So my father was kind of a hobby architect. He was a jack of many media, master of none, and I kind of grew up following the same path. So I'd had some exposure to drafting and modeling, and then suddenly got drafted into theater, where I was, my first show as a teenager was creating set dressing for a play set in an artist's studio. And I immediately started to think of the space as a huge functional sculpture, and have looked at that in buildings. And if you look behind me, this is the little walls of one of the spirals on the walls of in a niche of my straw bale home that I had the pleasure of building about 14 years ago. Space design is so important to me, like especially in the theater. Like, people walk in, it lets us know where we are, right? It often communicates a sense of emotion or feeling before the actors even take the stage or any of the dialogue starts. And I put this in this slide here, a picture of someone during a session, right? And so many of the clinics look like this. There is a place to be, there's a place for a neutral slate. And I understand not wanting to influence, because a lot of people coming into therapeutic settings are bringing their own inner world into that room. And to have something that's distracting could actually basically hinder the process a little bit. So I can see the value in a space design like that, but I also feel like there, as someone who would much rather be out in the forest than sitting in a stale white room, I feel like the area of designing and accentuating space for ceremonies is something that we could be doing a little more work in. Now, one of the things I think, Al, you also mentioned that it's really only been in the last 4 years that you've been diving into sort of work. I think a lot of people who would have looked at some of my artwork before 2020 would have assumed I used a lot more psychedelics than I actually have. But I had a few key experiences that definitely influenced things. But I've certainly been exploring a little more and a lot more intentionally in the last 4 years. There was that year when we couldn't go anywhere. So I think some of us went for some journeys in our own minds rather than jumping on airplanes. And that certainly had me exploring some new realms. Now, one of the places where I had sort of the most space to sort of explore was kind of in ceremonial space. That wasn't necessarily engineered to be psychedelic space, but some of us found that those were really wonderful environments to weave together sort of intention and community and music and movement. And I share this piece here. This is I want to be very clear. The image that's on the left is from an event that is not a psychedelic retreat by any way, shape, or form. It's one of the fire circle ceremony events that I am a part of, where a group of us work each day to kind of come up with a collaborative design to grace the ceremonial space, sort of laying in the intentions of the fire lighting ceremony the particular night. And there was one that was on sort of patterns and sort of shifting patterns, and the group settled on this beautiful sort of snake image winding its way through this massive circle. The fire pit that you see in the center is about 8 feet wide. So to give you a sense of scale, this is something that, will have 100 people dancing around in it, spark up a fire at 11 at night and play until the sun comes up or we don't have any more energy. And I just remember, we were finishing this up as the light was fading and transitioning to dusk. And I was just struck by this, and I was like, oh, I'm going to make a painting based off of that. So that I then created this piece that for me is just an immediate return to that particular night, which held a lot of really potent energy and a wonderful experience, right? So the walk into a space like that, there's something about when you're greeted by a space that feels sacred, right? The word means to be set aside. This is not something that is part of your normal day-to-day. You start to enter in that space in a higher state of awareness and mindfulness and intention. And I feel like walking into whatever space that we are working with in a therapeutic session or in any other sort of entheogenic ceremony, that to just make sure that, like, I think to have a space that is very clear that this is for something that's special. It's not just a random person's living room and someone's futon that you're having this experience on, but a space that's set aside can have people entering into that experience in I think a more positive mindset. Like it helps prepare them for what they're going in for and make them feel held by the physical space. Again, these are all my thoughts and suppositions. Another very intensely clear place that I feel like the arts have to play is entry points into larger conversations, right? And each of these paintings, we got Paul Stamets on the left, one of my portraits of Maria Sabina in the center, and Michael Pollan on the right, are things that I felt moved to do. Paul Stamets, for me, he was a huge window. In 2006, a friend of mine kind of introduced me to his work while we're on a walk in the woods. And, after picking up my seal and running, I was hooked, and got very interested in mycology. And this was a piece that I actually was working on live at an event. A lot of, especially with the sort of the rise of electronic dance music, where people are performing, and you're in a space where someone's sitting behind a laptop and maybe turning some knobs. Those things aren't necessarily the most visually stimulating shows compared to when you've got 6 or 7 people sweating, moving to create the music. A lot of people are integrating projections and live painters with these kinds of shows. And so I was actually working on this portrait of Paul Stamets at an event at COSM, the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors. And some guy came up to me and he's like, "Hey dude, who's that? Is that Jerry Garcia?" I'm like, "No, dude, not Jerry Garcia." He's like, "Well, who is it?" "That's Paul Stamets." He's like, "Who's he?" I'm like, "Oh, he's one of the world's more prominent mycologists." Like, "What's that?" "Study of mushrooms." "What's cool about that?" I was like, "Well," and I gave him like my 30-second elevator pitch. And then I was like, you know what? if you happen to be around in April, you should come to the Magic of Mushrooms. It was a 3-hour intro lecture that I gave and like a cultivation demo. And he's like, I think I'll do that. And guy showed up. 2 years later, I get an email from this guy. He's gone way further in cultivation than I have in terms of scale and depth. And similarly, when we see this little abuela here, right? A lot of people are like, who's that? And then I get to share the story of how those of us with my complexion know of psilocybin and the mushrooms, and it's all thanks to her. And also get to share her story about how and why things shifted and why she later regretted her decision, and why I feel like intentional work with these sacraments is essential to sort of kind of do a little bit of repair for her gift. And then, Michael Pollan, as an author, I fell in love with his work when first reading Botany of Desire, now like 15 years ago. And to see that he, put out his 2 books on psychedelics, and that one of them was picked up as a Netflix series, was huge. And each of these ones have had multiple times where someone has come up to me asking me who this person was. Now, many of us have a message and we want people to hear that, right? But if we approach someone when they're at just at a still spot where they're centered in their life and their habits, and you start coming up to someone and say, hey, you should think X, Y, or Z. Most often people are going to react to that with a level of guardedness. Like, who are you? Why are you telling me what to think? The second you can trick someone into approaching you with a question, they're intrinsically going to be way more open to what you have to say. And so these, especially, as we're looking at advocacy work and how to try to bring to light the potential that psychedelics have to transform our mental health systems, and that's a easy angle for us to try to sell why we should look at maybe rewriting our legal relationships with these substances. If we can bait people into asking us questions to initiate the dialogue, we're going to have a much more engaged and attentive audience in the messages that we're trying to convey. Just as a side note, I don't know how many of you were watching closely or paying attention to what just happened in Massachusetts last week. We had a ballot measure that unfortunately did not pass. It was 43 to 56%, where we were trying to legalize natural psychedelic medicines. And there were a bunch of factors that led to it not passing. There were even rifts within the psychedelic community that some people felt very strongly that they did not want it to be legalized, but just that we should have been pushing for statewide decriminalization. But for me, I have friends, dear friends, who are working in psychedelic space who are and friends who need those medicines to function. Like, I have friends who would not be alive if it weren't for them finding a solution that unfortunately forces them to break the law. And friends who are helping people like that, and are helping people and breaking the law in order to do that, right? And so, and also as someone who lost a friend to cancer, one of my closest childhood friends, first really close loss of my generation. For me, last summer, there were some of us who were the family was interested in doing some work with psilocybin for dealing with the end of life palliative care. And unfortunately, he never got well enough to get out of the hospital to do that. So I feel very strongly that we have to work to legalize these things so that it can be fully integrated. Because there are a lot of people who just want to, who just want to decriminalize things because for them it's easier to just break the law, and they don't want to deal with regulation or any of those processes, and there's a certain entitlement in that. That's my little long rant, and I actually got into a little kerfuffle with a psychedelic advocate who my first interaction was around, why are you painting Michael Pollan's portrait? He's in line with the corporate PACs and the MAPS that's trying to control and make this medicine inaccessible and way too expensive. And I'm like, hey, different perspectives, right? There's the mycological world is very diverse, and I think that the psychedelic community should be as well, and there are different perspectives and ways of working. And if it weren't for the work of organizations like MAPS and the contribution that Michael Pollan did to have soccer moms start reading about how mushrooms can heal, I don't think we would be in the place we are in this country in terms of advancing the discussion. So in addition to, for me, these are honoring people who I've learned a lot from, who I respect. They become a really nice way of starting to create dialogue with all sorts of people, including like the portrait of Michael Pollan. My studio is adjacent to a Chinese food restaurant where sometimes when I'm doing late night, I'll order from there, and they'll bring the food into my studio. And they had a young woman who walked in and was like, whoa, who's that? And we probably spent like 20, 30 minutes talking about that. And next thing you know, I told her to go watch the Netflix series, and she came back like the next week, like, oh my God, I didn't know that, So there's a huge potential for us to sort of like use this as a little bait to start to spread the word, as it were. So here's some more portraits. These were actually, both of these were commissions of John C. Lilly. If any of you are not familiar, he is the pioneer of the float tank, the sort of sensory deprivation chambers. By the way, have any of you actually done float tanks? All right, yeah, they're phenomenal. And as I like to say, supplemented float tank sessions are also really wonderful, to be in a space where you're just floating in darkness and stillness and quiet. And Lilly did a lot of work with entheogens. He did a lot of really weird stuff. I always like to tell people, if you don't know who he is and you want a really funny entry point into seeing some of the far out parts of his work, go look at Drunk History and look his name up. He got a little wacky in some of what he did, but also did some amazing work. And one of these, the one to the left, I did for a local float tank, and then someone reached out to me and commissioned the second one. And they're another person who basically feels like his work transformed his life to the point where you say saved it. Yeah, and another point where weird looking guy, weird looking images. What the hell's going on here? People tend to ask questions, and then you have a chance to talk to them about it. This is another similar piece where I had this work commissioned by someone that I knew, who I knew was a huge mushroom enthusiast in terms of like wildcrafted gourmet mushrooms. And they said, hey, I would love to commission a painting from you. All right. And they were like, I love mushrooms, right? And I said, yep. Do you know why? It's like, well, I guess not, other than the fact they're awesome, right? And they said, no. I, for years, suffered from debilitating cluster headaches, like to the point of spending up to 3 days alone in the dark in a basement because it was the quietest space with no stimulation and no light. And they literally would spend sometimes up to 3 days just holding their head in pain. And we're really at the edge of it, and discovered a group online called Cluster Busters, and she described them as a support group for people with cluster to, help one another avoid offing themselves. Um, and someone on there shared that they, when they first started getting the cluster headaches, went super straight edge. They're like, well, I got this problem. I should cut all these things out of my, that person used to party a lot and whatnot. And then every now and then they'd slip and smoke a little weed and suddenly notice that the clusters weren't so bad. And then they took some mushroom once and suddenly realized that they didn't have any for a while and then started playing with it. And so the individual who commissioned this piece now uses a very light, like tea, not even enough to hallucinate, like just enough to sense that something's happening, but what's the fancy term for? I mean, not quite a microdose, but certainly not a macro. And it was an instant cure. They would feel a piercing sensation behind their left eye, and take the tea, gone, no more cluster headaches, just like that. So they became, essentially the subject that I sent them essentially a study, a small watercolor and pencil sketch that I said, this is what I'm thinking of doing. And their response was, I wasn't thinking something that literal. And I said, well, I think it's an interesting story and I'm going to paint this regardless. And if you don't like it, I'll do something else for you. And, when it was done, they took one look at it and said, yep, that's mine. Again, this is another one where, it's one of the things I like about this piece is that it's just, it's sort of suggestive of the story. It makes sense when I tell it, but there's just enough ambiguity in it that people often are like, what's going on in here? Gives me a chance to tell the story, gives me a chance to share with some people that may not know that that is one of the really effective ways of managing cluster headaches. Probably maybe the most. They'd run through tons of different pharmaceuticals with no effect. And then this one little natural cure. This piece is called, the title I give to is an unorthodox solution. Which brings me to another thing, right? We just had this little campaign, and I had the fortunate ability to kind of focus about a month and a half of my life and creative energy on trying to boost the signal for the measure, ballot measure 4. And after one of the events where one of the other campaigners had a whole bunch of very sterile, very normal looking material, I decided to whip out this little piece. And if any of you don't recognize him immediately, Rick Doblin, founder of MAPS, was in Massachusetts at the onset of October, doing a little campaigning to help amplify the message and whatnot. So yeah, trying to provide exciting and engaging material that speaks to the right people. There's no one way that's going to reach everyone, right? One of my friends and my collaborator on the book that I put out about a year and a half ago, The Way of Gaia, Steve Trombulak, former Dean of Sciences at Middlebury, he would talk about how, in his work as an environmental advocate, you'd have to find the narrative that would speak to the person, right? You have to kind of figure out who they are and which is the way that's going to be the en route to get your message to that particular person. And the clean, dry, boring media is going to work for some people, and something that's a little more flashy and eye-catching is going to work for others. So, another way we can kind of help celebrate sort of what we're trying to achieve. So, now, this is a piece that I titled "Of the Vine," and it's basically a ayahuasca vine cross section with something suggestive of the Shipibo patterns integrated into it. this piece for me was not so much a reflection. There's a bunch of people who've approached me over the years and just assume that, if you do, visionary art or psychedelic looking art, you've probably done all the different things. And I is not one of the medicines that I've actually done any work with. And I had several people like, it's funny, a lot of people have been like, oh, you should come try this with me. Um, it's and I sat with that question for a little while. Basically, for me, the process of creating this was kind of a meditation where I was just thinking about what I knew, those that I know that had shared experiences with it, and sorting through my feelings about like the um, the sort of energetic signature of the medicine, which for me feels like my own sense has like such strong ties to the land that it comes from, that part of me is like, yeah, I think if I ever am going to go down that road, it will be uh, tied to the land where it comes from, and not something that I would explore in this bios, little little section of our world in the Northeast. So for me, art creation is time for me to think about stuff. A lot of my work happens at two different speeds. It's very quick at some stages, and then intensely slow when I get into little tiny lines and tiny dot land. And I can and I don't have to think too much about what I'm doing when I'm at those repetitious stages in the painting. And it gives me this, basically a physical act to give myself space to explore an idea or to concentrate on something or meditate on something. So meditative tool is another realm. Also celebrating and honoring people or particular, medicines. I created this piece after having sort of an introduction to sassafras. I don't know if any of you have used that, but it is something very close to MDMA without the methyl involved. So it's a different signature, some similarities in it and some strong differences, and I had a very strong positive experience in a few ritual settings with that particular medicine, and decided to create this piece afterwards, and try to, how do I match the feeling of what I experienced during the journey. So now, I've also thought about, a lot of these things are reactions, or responses after being sort of in um, in a ceremony. Um, the pieces that I have here are actually some pieces that I sort of created within medicine spaces. The one on the left actually as a intention setting piece that began with essentially, I took some bittersweet vine that I was clearing, created a little hoop, and I was there was an intention that I was holding as I was going into a particular ceremony, where it was really about sort of building connections. And so physical web weaving was a wonderful expression of it. And I basically was working on this during the initial stages of onset. Depending on the particular substance, like a lot of times a lot of times people think, a lot of visionary artists are tripping balls when they're painting or whatnot, but those are not great time for getting good quality work done, because a lot of there are part of particularly like mushroom journeys, right? Our minds are firing in so many different unique ways, creating new patterns, and so like trying to keep on one track is really difficult sometimes. So basically the whole web weaving thing was just a focus like during the 45 minutes of onset and into the initial put, and then that put away. But I am also someone who am a little bit of an occultist, right? And there's some laws about magic, and things can. I also believe that that, you know, physical objects can hold memory. And certainly memory for the person who might have been interacting with that object during a particular moment. And, you know, for me, creating something that is a part of intention setting before a journey, something that you might actually have with you during the onset, even if you're doing something simple that's not requiring, like, I wasn't worried about the aesthetic quality of what I was getting out of it. I was just trying to create a physical object that was kind of helping to lock in part of that experience for me. And then I came back and worked with it a little more, as well as going back in for a subsequent ceremony. The piece on the right was actually one where I was co-sitting for someone. So I was the second guide in the room, and that was my as someone who has a hard time just sitting still and doing nothing. That gave me something to do with my hands so that I can be fully present and quiet and still with a little light, and little tiny reading light clipped to a clipboard, and was making marks based off of the interactions with the primary guide and the journeyer. And so that was me kind of interpreting the things that the journeyer was calling in, the experiences that they were going through, things that they were saying. So as we were taking notes, some of the things that were said are encoded in this piece. So, so you know, it's something that I know. When I was at the main Fungi Fest, there was someone who was displaying the works where during an integration circle, they sat rapidly sketching with pastels, and each one was a response to what the person's share was. To be honest, I feel like when I looked at the actual pieces, they varied so little aesthetically from one to the next. It was hard to feel like, you know, if the person is going to feel the resonance with that. But it was a practice that they had while they were listening to the circle sharing in a group session, where they would do this piece and then give it to the person who was sharing. So even if the so like, and then they walk away with a little sort of piece of archaeology from the whole experience, even if it was someone else's perspective. Another thing, so I'm someone who has been exploring I've been doing a lot of intentional work with a guide, where we've been looking at not just journeys where you come to the sitting with a sort of challenge or something you're trying to work through. We've been playing with essentially like rewiring things in our heads, where we start the ceremony off like, this is what I'm carrying in, this is what I'm hoping to help cultivate an energy or a shift in my life. These are some keywords. So for me, you know, this particular piece was made where the guide and I took a walk while I had a small sample of a particular fungus that so to get to know sort of its signature, its potency, before returning to the space where we were going to do the full ceremony. And I had some things that I pulled out of the walk that drew some clarity of what I wanted to call in, and then the painting on the right is sort of like things that sort of were coming up. So this painted over the sort of intention setting, and that was my integration work. The next day I spent most of the day painting what was experienced during the journey, and this is actually a piece that I've come back to over several other journeys, where it's being sort of built as sort of a landscape of this sort of exploration. So for me, these pieces, and I know not everyone's going to be able to, you know, it takes a certain level of skill to kind of create an image that might be representing something you see, but even if you're making marks that are there are even more simple ways of just making marks on a surface that can just serve as a reminder for what you came back from your journey with. So I think there's massive potential. So I know someone mentioned like sort of art therapy and whatnot for integrating the creation of artwork in the lead into and the aftermath of a session. So so I mean, I just wanted to maybe stop there in terms of like these are some of the key areas where I've been exploring, and you know, if I just throw my handles up there, if you wanted to like, I should have actually done that sooner. If you wanted to be exploring some of my other work, if there are questions about any particular thing, I guess this is where I'm gonna start saying less and hearing from you all if you have questions or thoughts or yeah. Do is Quest here? Oh, Quest.
I think Quest had to step away.
Cool.
I thought your presentation was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
I'll second it. I was just about to drop off for a class, but I'm glad I get the chance to say thank you. This was, yeah, it was beautiful. I'm looking forward to exploring your work with the links you gave. Thank you.
100% agree. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was super insightful. And I've seen a lot of visionary artists in the psychedelic space here in Portland. And there is a collective out here called The Haven. You may or may not have heard of them. I'll send you the link over your Instagram, but they are a collective of artists that kind of have the same vibe as you and have the same mission. So hello from the West Coast.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a couple friends who are involved in other art forms. Like one of my friends who's a phenomenal musician, and you know we find ourselves kind of struggling here in Massachusetts in some ways. And he's like, my friend Sean, he's just like, man, we're just on the wrong coast, man. Like, we're like, and there's part of me that's like, there've been times where I think if I hadn't had a kid, I might have run off to to someplace in the Bay Area or Colorado where there's a really vibrant you know, visionary art scene, and there are galleries for this kind of work. And here, like, people look at it like, you want me to put that up in my place? And you know, and there's part of me that's like, man, part of me wants to move out to a place like Oregon or whatnot. And at the same time, I also feel like part of, you know, that this is such a influential area in terms of, you know, our the schools that program so many of our citizens. Like we gotta make a fight to kind of shift the culture a little bit here. So I'm staying in the area that's maybe a little less receptive to what I have to offer, but I'm gonna try to get some change happening here. So, but yeah.
I love the piece you did as a co-sitter, like just sketching someone's journey. That's amazing. That was really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In theory, we're supposed to do a follow-up session, in which case it's potentially not done. So I'm still holding on to it, but I gotta see if they're actually gonna follow through with that. If not, I'm gonna send it their way so that they can put it on their wall.
That would be amazing. That's really cool. Thank you for everything. It was great. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm so sorry that I had to miss the first half of your presentation. So I hope there will be a recording sent out. But I really enjoyed what I did catch of it. And I really liked what you said about I'm one of those people that don't have the skill to draw what I saw in my journey, which um, I really wish I could. But I like what you said about like just make marks. That helps. And I did like draw out some of the things I saw in my one journey, but it's like it's the ones where I saw sacred geometry or fractals. I was like, oh, I don't have a brain that could do that.
I'm a growth mindset person, so I would just say repeat that sentence, but add yet to the end. um, we're never, if it's something that you feel like you need to or want to, you got some people who can help teach you how. But one of the funny things is like I look at like the aesthetic of a lot of the artwork that I make that's incredibly uh, there's a lot going on, and yet some of the work that speaks to me the most is like Neolithic art. Um, and and there's something about the rawness of that I think a lot of, and it's one of the things that the visionary art can have multiple meanings in the self-taught, right? There's often something that if you look at someone who a great example, if you were to if you could go through the doors of the American Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore, I forget the exact, or the MOVA, Museum of Visionary Art, MOVA, I think, is that it? The Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. That has a focus on a lot of the artists there are self-taught and has some work from people really interesting, even people who were in like mental institutions ages ago who are just driven to create. And they don't have the sophistication or the tools or the right materials, but there's something in the quality of the drive to create, no matter what the obstacle is, that you can feel coming through the work. And even though some of the mark making is incredibly rough, there's like a power in that. So I would encourage you to like just not, if you're engaged in making your own work in response to a journey, like just try to take your judgment about the aesthetic quality of it out, and just remember that image might be just an anchor point for you for the journey, so that you can kind of hold on to the best pieces of what you experience while in that space. Again, you missed a quote. One of the things I love, Android Jones said it really well. Art is the best tool we have for bringing back evidence from the places we can't take cameras, right? And I just thought that was a really succinct and beautiful way of describing like how to take a part of an entheogenic experience and try to hold on to it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you say you have classes to teach how to do this?
I mean, I do I've been an art educator for 28 years. I'm just not doing it in a public school classroom anymore. So, but yeah. And there's a great network of tons of I don't know where you're from. What area are you at?
I'm in Vancouver, the
Oh man.
northern part of West Coast.
Uh, one of my favorite painters is out in your neck of the woods, Autumn Sky Morrison, and she teaches at her retreat center out there. She's such a sweetheart and such an amazing artist. Like she paints such beautiful work so quickly. It's she's one of those people that I'd hate if she wasn't so damn nice. She's a wonderful human, and yeah, she's actually going to be teaching at Chapel of Sacred Mirrors in New York in May. But I reached out because a friend of mine was looking for other opportunities to work with her, and she does retreats up there. And I'll if you contacted me after this, I can point you to where that is. And actually, yeah, there's a pretty decent scene of sort of, from what I know of visionary art and similar, like the sort of transformational festival community up in that neck of the woods. So the left coast has got it going on.
Thank you. I'll do that.
Anyone else got thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I thought it was really great. I think your work is awesome. I've been to COSM a handful of times, and I think I've actually probably is some of your work at COSM? Is it in, yeah.
Yeah, I've got a mural in the Mushroom Cafe, and I think one of the bigger flexes that I have as an artist, I got a couple good ones. Like actually, what's funny is I did a painting, Tremati's versicolor turkey tail mushroom. It was the first species that I was introduced to in terms of wildcraft. I was introduced to it in the day I was pointing at Paul Stamets' work, and I did a painting of it. And then down the line, he actually contacted me and bought the piece from me. One of the other greatest flexes I have is that there are only two works permanently installed in the Entheon Gallery at COSM that are not Alex or Allison's. They have a guest gallery in the downstairs space, but the rest of it's just their work, except for a sculpture that Suki Barber did of Albert Hoffman. Like she knew him in his late days and was like taking references, like measurements off of visiting him. And the portrait that I did of Maria Sabina that are both housed in the psychedelic reliquary down there. So
Yeah, I love the psychedelic reliquary area. It's awesome. And yeah, I thought I recognized the style. Um, it did inspire me to finish something I've been slowly working on over the weeks here while I was watching. I did
oh, nice.
the final outer rim, just a little mandala. But yeah, I guess I'm curious, like what your I mean, I know you said your father was an artist, so you kind of always been connected to art in that way, but how did you go through like know that this is what you wanted to do in this specific, spiritual psychedelic space and even finding your specific style? I'm curious if you could talk to that or speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, oh, um, that's interesting because a big part of the style of work that I've been doing has been also highly influenced by my sort of spiritual path, as I use the word animist. It feels more accurate because it's most closely sort of aligned with people who describe themselves as pagan or nature-based religion. Um, and I it's hard to find people who sort of there's not a whole lot of access to animist churches or organizations or anything like that in our culture, um, outside of most indigenous um, religions or spiritualities are animist in nature. Um, and I stumbled upon the Earth Spirit community in 1998 and attended uh, the Rites of Spring, which I think they were like 25 years in at that point, and now are getting close to like drawing close to 50 years. Um, uh, so the oldest similar organization or sorry, pagan type organization in the country, and that there was a resonance I felt with a lot of the people there and the ways of sort of like celebrating the earth is sacred in a way where they wound up uh, shifting. I grew up just outside of Boston and moved out to Western Mass in 2001 to really kind of be closer to nature and be closer to the community that now has like a lot of people have like from those circles have settled within this small little area. So I get to live in the middle of nowhere, um, and have bear and moose and deer and bobcat run around my yard, and still have lots of friends just happen to drive by my home because we're all nestled in the hills near here. Um, uh, and that community definitely had a huge impact on my artwork, but also there's something to be said for when you see something in someone's artwork that speaks to you, right? That feels like an experience that you've had, or like the things that often feel like energetic points of connections or mycelial threads, or um, those are things that I often wind up putting in my work that I see happening in a lot of other visionary artists' work. And we all kind of inspire and borrow and share things that work and that we resonated, but and I just try to uh, if you look at a lot of visionary artists, some of them are a little more clean, a little sharper than mine. Even though there's a lot going on, I kind of like the crunchy, like I'll paint with palette knives and whatnot, and I'll deliberately try to avoid perfect uh, lines and clean edges sometimes, because I just want something that feels a little more organic than something that feels like a computer would have created it better. So uh, kind of celebrate the quality of the medium. So yeah, combination of factors. And there was definitely an experience that I had in that first heroic journey back in 1999, where we were, man, it was a hunter's moon. Jupiter was in the closest position that it would ever be in my lifetime to the Earth. There were 3 other weird astrological correspondences. We consumed around dusk. We set out for a walk. I was the guide. I was the physical guide on the site. Like I was the person who knew the land. And there was a point where, we were wandering around and suddenly someone was like, I have no idea where I am. And someone was like, yeah, me neither. And then I stopped and I'm like looking at this landscape that looked nothing like anything I knew. And they saw the look in my face and they're like, Martin, do you know where we are? I'm like, I mean, we were heading in the right direction. I was just moving on autopilot, but like the whole landscape looked different under the circumstance. But there was an experience that I had where I stepped into a hole next to a root of a tree, this weird thing, and my leg went in, and suddenly, like, I was in a hole, like almost up to my knee, and I, was kind of stuck for a second, but I paused and I just sat there with my eyes shut, and I could see the roots connecting to where they touched other roots. And then I followed those roots and could see trees kind of coming up from this network. And I just entered this grove and I was sitting there feeling the root on my leg and watching the landscape. And then I opened my eyes and everything was as I saw it in the vision. Like the trees were exactly where I saw them in my head. And the next time that I used psilocybin was actually at a fire circle event out on the West Coast. And it was a much lighter dose. And I experimented with closing my eyes and watching where people were moving with my eyes shut. And then would open my eyes and everyone was where I saw them with my eyes shut. And so, it was interesting. That's where I started to like wonder, like, I feel like these things make me psychic, right? And one of the things that we know from the brain imaging that happens when people are under the effects of psilocybin is that there's decrease of blood flow to a particular area of the thalamus that regulates sensory input, right? The part of our brain that decides what information that's coming in am I going to pay attention to, right? Because every little bit of stimulus that your mind could possibly pick up on right now, if it were paying attention to it all, it would be nothing, be doing no one thing well, right? So it has to select. And I feel like that's one of the things that for me, this is totally, this is my hypothesis, is that, it shuts that regulatory system off and we get hit with these things that we might actually be able to access all the time, but our brain just has to pick what part of the many different things that it could potentially tap into. And it's one of the reasons why I particularly like playing with the psilocybin as a tool for sort of increasing uh, uh, psychic potential. And actually the major piece, if I were to actually, what, I'm going to bring it back to a slide, right? I shared a little bit about this one, but So this piece, one of the things that as I started this journey, just to tell you a little bit more, I had been working on a number of different projects that felt like back to back to back to back to back. And I suddenly realized that, I'd had a better meditative practice before my child came into the world, before I tried sort of rebuilding my life and building a new home. And I had just been a like decade plus, closer to 15 or 17 years of just putting out tons of material, tons of art, tons of energy, and I wasn't taking the time to sit and listen. And this sitting happened just a few months after the book that I had been working on with Steve Trombiak, The Way of Gaia. It was like a 7-year project in addition to our teaching loads. Like we were just like picking away where we could have, and at the end it was just a ton of, we set a deadline and we pushed really hard for the last 2 years. And I wanted to change that. I was like, I've not been listening. I've not been taking the time to take in. I've just been creating. And boy, did this flip a switch. It was like the intuitive flashes, the things that were coming through. I started thinking about someone, and suddenly, boom, a text message arrives from them. They were driving into work one morning and just thinking, oh, we haven't had a fire drill in a while. I wonder if we're going to have another one before the end of school year. And 2 hours later, we're all walking out of the building. These things. It was like an on switch. Just a funny correlation for me in terms of like going into a journey saying, I would like to help me listen better, and then having all these experiences kind of come hit me. So that's a little more about that particular piece. And I realized I went on a long rant, but that also, like some of the things of when you're in the sort of visionary or under the effects of a medicine state, often we see sort of like energetic threads and connections between us, other humans, and that like trying to depict that in a way that's not the way that it's not exactly the way I experience in a journey. Like it doesn't look like what I see during that, but feels the same. Um, that's something that's also influenced some of what's going on in some of the pieces.
Yeah, thanks so much. That was great. I could listen to your rant for a while. I was enjoying it.
I had just enough coffee that you have to, sometimes I get diarrhea mouth when I yeah. I want to make sure not to be sleepy for you all tonight. Any other thoughts or questions or?
How long does it take you to like create a piece on average? Is there an average amount of time, or does it vary a lot?
Oh God, yeah, that's actually I wanted to pull a piece up here since you asked a great question. I mentioned one of my flexes here. So this is Trametes versicolor, or turkey tail, or Coriolis mushroom, right? If you don't know it, it is an intensely common, very easy to find everywhere, an intensely potent medicinal mushroom. It's not a great gourmet because it's thin and rubbery. It's a very thin polypore shelf mushroom. The Latin name Trametes versicolor, many colors. It comes in all sorts of different like bluish hues to like almost browns and purples. The common thread is it's going to have a little white edge along the outer line. It's and it's something that you can simply boil into like a tea. You can do a double extraction to get the alcohol soluble medicinal compounds out of it. This is a large piece. It is the original is 48 by 32, if I'm remembering correctly. So 4 feet. And if I were to I don't know if I can't. Let me find another picture of it. Well, if you zoom in, there's like, I mean, every single edge of these fronds here is like a whitish with these tiny little lines going across it, going out, radiating out, and lots of dot work. And I remember doing like about 2 of these fronds with the little white line work on it. And I was like, man, this looks so good. And then I got to like the 3rd and finished it and was just like, huh. And then I stepped back and looked at the whole thing and how long it was gonna take me to finish. And I basically was like, what have I done? And I just like put the thing on the wall and sat with it half finished, staring at me for like half a year, going like, come on, Martin, come finish me, right? Because again, at the time, I wasn't a studio artist. I would have like an hour one night, 2 hours another night, or I'd have, a weekend where I had like half a day where I could dig in. So it was also harder for me to track how long some of them were. There are paintings that I've started, on a Friday, worked through the weekend, and then kind of finished it up. Like there's one of my pieces, the Colin, which is sort of a wolf with a lot of dots that look kind of like Aboriginal art. That one, is started and finished within a long weekend. The first month that I dug in full time as an artist, I started and finished 5.5 paintings. They were not as detailed as this, and there are other pieces that some that feel like they paint themselves. They just take shape really quickly, and others that the line work and the dot work can just take forever. So there have been pieces where I've worked on it for a couple months, put it on a wall, thinking it's done, and then sitting with it and realizing something's missing, maybe stare at it for a year and decide to pop something new on it. So it's super varied, and I don't have a great single answer because so many of them are so different from the other in terms of process.
I was going to ask about your process, and maybe you already talked about this at the beginning. I was wondering if it was mostly intuitive, or do you ever plan out your paintings or use reference or anything like that?
Absolutely. One of the things for me, I I was asked if God, this is like 10 years ago. Someone asked me how I dealt with artist block. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Part of it is like, as a teacher, especially working with kids at an art school that has kind of one of the reasons I was happy to step away is that the school that I started out, after it was a brand new charter school. I came after 5 years. They'd only graduated 2 full classes. They started with the 9th grade and then expanded. It was very exciting and experimental, and everyone was coming there, was psyched to be there. And then I sort of joked that the school got punished for its good behavior, in that it became more, kids were having a lot of success there, especially like we had a lot of kids with learning disabilities and social emotional challenges that were finding a window into success based off of some of uh, our ideals about integrating different subject matter, like bridging arts and sciences, things like that. And if you can get a window for success for someone who feels they have an aptitude in the arts and suddenly can find a way to apply it to mathematics, and suddenly they're like, look, I can do something with this. It changes the way they relate to the learning. More and more, we started getting fewer and fewer kids who are super passionate about arts, and to sit there and to be an art teacher and to have to feel like you're whipping people into creating felt so bizarre. And I'd often walk around the classroom with like little index card sized pieces of paper that I'd be scrawling on. And I would, basically like, if I had the time to work right now, this is what I'd be doing. And so I had, sketchbooks and sketchbooks of paintings waiting to be realized. So when I did have the time to sit and paint, I had tons of resources to come to, and it's actually less often that I entered into a painting not knowing what I was going to do. And I realized one of the things that I've been doing of late is I'm reshaping my life. And it would be interesting. I invite you, check back in with me in like a year or two and be like, hey, have you experienced artist block yet? Or have you run out of all that content? Because I don't know, maybe I will. But so far, no. And I've been trying to give myself the gift of an occasional night and for the first month that I was, when I returned from the last summer event that kind of followed the model that I've been going on every year leading up to here. And that first month is like, now I'm a full-time artist. I gave myself a one night every week where I came in and some of these were with a little supplemental medicine. A couple of them, I came straight out of a float tank to a little sacrament and had this space set up where I had, music pumping in through my, awesome Bose headphones and one light centered in the room and moving around a piece and just playing, not worrying about what I was gonna come up with. And some of those wound up turning into backgrounds for other pieces, but just like to be able to remember the joy of just creating after so long, the limited studio time, where like, I have to get shit done, has been one of the things that's been intensely healthy for me, and I hope to keep that a part of the practice, is to remember to just play sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we discover new stuff.
Yeah, that's where it's the most fun. Thank you.
And the other end of that is when I'm zooming into the hyper detailed, like teeny tiny lines, working with brushes this big, teeny tiny, right? And this one's spread out. This is old. I'm ready to toss this one. But like, hyper detailed, like there's a freeness in that too. I'm not making compositional choices. I know I'm creating my film like texture in this section of the painting, and I'm just making one line at a time. Just making one line at a time. And if you want to see one of the so I mentioned, I showed you a piece of Alex Gray's at the onset. If you're not familiar with his wife, Alison Gray, she's also a phenomenal painter with an intensely different style and an intensely different process, largely geometric based, highly structured, working with her own sort of secret language of these glyphs. Oh, there we go. Can I highlight him? You can
It's the headband from Cosm I bought of her art.
Yeah. So and she's also very influenced by her artwork is very influenced by her Jewishness. Like there are several different religious traditions that prohibit the representation of form that we see in the world, right? That's God's creation. We don't mimic God's creations, and we see that in Islamic art, right, in Orthodox Judaism. And while she will do representational work from time to time, she'll do some figure drawing or a portrait. Her major body of work is all driven off of the sacred symbols, and she has this really wonderful way of talking about like she's filling in like these things that would look like they'd be intensely easy to create digitally, but she has this piece that she recently, within the last decade, did this piece that took her 2 years to complete, and that was 2 years in addition to all the energy that they put in. Like one of their biggest, she talks about also being a social sculptor, the community they built around Cosm, which is huge and very I mean, it's a psychedelic mecca right now in the Northeast, but these tiny dots that are like less than a 16th of an inch square, right? Tiny. Like she has a magnifying glass and like single hair brushes that she uses to fill some of these things in. And she has this really beautiful metaphor of like, yep, it's the only thing you can do is just fill in that block. Like you're at this stage in your life, and this is you can't do this other thing that you want to do in your future. You can't do this thing that was a part of your past. You just fill in that block now, and then you fill in the next block and the next block. And the dedication to that process is like one of the most insane, lifelong works of integration of a visionary experience through, entheogens. And yeah, her work is intense. And yeah, 2 years on a 4 foot by 2 foot piece. Like, I've had pieces that take me that long to finish, but that's because I'm farting around with like 8 pieces at the same time. She just attacks one. So.
It seems like a good place to pause.
Yeah.
This was such a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I ask if there's anything that you feel that you got of value from this. First off, let's treat this like an introduction. I'm easy to find online, and I love talking about my work and sharing more about it. If you are active on social media, if you want to check me out, Martin Bridge Art at both Facebook and Instagram. And if you feel moved and ask that I would have share work with your friends. Like, the ripple effects of the internet can be intensely powerful, and especially as I'm making a bold leap into the both giving art my full time, but also stepping out as a psychedelic advocate, like having spent like a month and a half just trying to hit event after event after event, and try to raise awareness about the ballot measure that we were trying to push through. And even though we didn't succeed, we moved the conversation forward. And sadly, in Mass, we don't have another shot for 6 years. But anything you can do to help, like, amplify the messages, like, I appreciate any assistance in sharing work with your friends and family, and that would be deeply appreciated. So.
That was another, if it's all right, Josh, if I could keep going a little bit more. Yeah, when you were talking about the legalization piece, and I don't know if you've read it before, but the story, We Will Call It Paula. It's really good. I really recommend everyone who's interested in psychedelics kind of look into it. It's basically a story about a fiction about somebody who, starts a psychedelic company, like opening retreat centers, and then it becomes like this big national thing, but then kind of eventually ends up getting swallowed up by capitalism, and the original values get kind of lost in this capitalistic nature of society, and it becoming more about money, and then the company becomes a beast of its own, and she ends up getting replaced by her, investors, by some guy who never tried a psychedelic, and he's just an MBA, and he's good at business, and he's going to build this business. And it's a really good story, and it's kind of like a cautionary tale of the direction that legalizing psychedelics could go when you try to create any kind of business in this society. And it was just good food for thought. And then I posted it in our group cohort for Daniel's class, and somebody actually said, which I hadn't thought of, like, yeah, maybe this is why we should keep psychedelics, just decriminalize them, not necessarily make them legal, so that this corruption doesn't happen. And I was like, well, I don't know if I agree with that, but that's an interesting take. I never really thought about the two sides of this debate. So when you brought it up, I just read this thing, like a couple days ago. So it was a tiny synchronicity there that you happened to bring that up. And I didn't know about the Massachusetts thing. It's a shame that the MAPS thing with the FDA got turned down after all the work they've been doing. So it's definitely an interesting topic, and I hate to hear that we're still encountering so much resistance. But I don't know if there's really a question here, just kind of an open idea that I had that I wanted to talk about. It's definitely a really good story if you want to check out.
Thank you for sharing.
Yep.
All right. All right, so I think as Josh was saying, we're at the time that we usually shut these things down after about 90 minutes, and yeah, I just again thank you. I really appreciate y'all taking the time to come let me talk about my passion projects and stuff. So
Thank you for showing us your art. It's really amazing.
Yes,
Wish
thank
I
you.
could see it in real life.